Last time on Kerbal Space Program. These mystery goo pods turned out to be almost totally worthless. But I'll just observe them and save them anyway. Can I repack my own parachute? Really? Cool. We can run up to this tree. We can climb this? Very poorly. Yes, good job climbing, Jeb. Alright, so not a total failure. We've actually gotten quite a lot of science. Let's plant a flag. We can just do this, speed up time. That guy is really spinning. That's really something. Yeah. That is lovely. It's a good thing parachutes don't have model tangling up. 'Cause it would. Do not ask me why that is spinning so much. I don't have an answer. Just enjoy it. The great wonder of Kerman. The spinning booster of about to splash into the ocean and hopefully stop spinning. We are back, and a dark gloom has fallen over the Kerbal Space Center. Not only because the sun is somewhere on the opposite side of the planet, but because you people have demanded that I murder Jeb in cold blood. I knew I should have never trusted his life to you. But anyway, if Jeb is going to go out, we're going to send him out in style, which means doing stuff. So here is his vehicle, and from here on out, we're going to try something new. Darkness has fallen over the Space Center as Jeb boards this experimental spacecraft. He goes into the brand new cabin, and he opens his flight computer, and he types in a single command. First making a typo, because keyboards are new technology to Kerbals. But his singular command is to lock steering to heading 90 by 88. With the flight computer accepting that command, it is time for him to take off into the night sky. His new spacecraft is equipped with a bunch of science equipment, including 2 return containers, and a brand new cabin with increased visibility, so he can see outwards. Look at that moon, or mun, depending on how you pronounce it. The spacecraft below it is powered by 2 solid rocket boosters on the sides, 1 large stage powered by this T-45 swivel engine, and then 1 smaller pug. Solid rocket boosters separate, and Jeb throttles the main engine up to 100% now that it is no longer going to interfere with the aerodynamics of the vehicle. And the mission of this flight is 2-part. Part 1, collect science, of course. Part 2 is to finally complete this contract to test this RT-10 Hammer solid rocket booster high in space above Kerman. This part is defueled on this flight, of course, because this rocket is actually exactly as heavy as the launch pad can take. By which I mean, if a small bird landed on top of it before Jeb had pressed the launch button, the launch pad would explode. Yes, it is literally that close. I am talking about 1 or 2 pounds lighter than the launch pad can sustain. And that is necessary for Jeb to accomplish his mission today. Because what else could Jeb get on this flight as Kerbal rises over the horizon than the very best? Yes, Kerbal is indeed the name of this star, and Kerbal is the name of the people in the cockpit. Yes, that is kind of confusing. But isn't it gorgeous to watch it rising over Kerman from this angle? Unfortunately, Jeb doesn't really get to see it because he's too busy staring at the moon. Or the mun! And meanwhile, as this ascent progresses, this LV-303 Pug is a nice little engine. It is a vacuum-optimized engine, it's very efficient, and it's very light, and it carries its own supply of fuel. The problem is, its thrust is kind of pathetic, generating about, around an eighth of the thrust of the last engine. So I'm just going to go ahead and speed up time here while we burn up to our final orbit. And yes, finally, now that that booster has burned out, we can see we are going to make it above 250 kilometers. And now, finally, Jeb can unlock steering. Jeb can remember to put a period at the end of his command to the flight computer to unlock steering. Again, I remind you, computers are absolutely new technology to these Kerbals. They don't know how they work. And as Jeb pitches over, we can finally get a view from inside the cockpit of the sun and Kerman together. Jeb takes a moment to soak in this view. After all, no Kerbal has ever seen Kerman from quite this angle. And that sun is absolutely gorgeous. I would remind you that this is actually the first sunrise of the Kerbal Space Program, given that today is the first day of the Kerbal Space Program. In-game, about 90 to 100 minutes have passed, depending on how long this flight has actually been. I didn't check. So, yeah, this is truly a remarkable moment. And as we pitch down, we can see Kerman. Not quite in its entirety, but very much a large part of the full disk from this altitude. Jeb can truly enjoy the view for a moment. As we get out, and we can see, oh look, we've made it to space. So we need to do all of the science. We can transmit these reports using the brand new technology of an antenna, which allows us to send science to a place where we aren't. So we transmit all of the data reports that we can get without exiting the spacecraft, because Jeb, now that he has come to his senses and realized exactly how far up he is, really should start working on that flight computer. After all, this will be the first re-entry from this altitude at all, or from any altitude using this cockpit. Of course, we must do a material study and study all of these amazing materials. 48 science, incredible. We can store that in this side storage unit. Isn't that excellent? And while we're at it, we can collect the leftover science from these two instruments, which didn't quite get everything last time. And we'll store that in here too. Yes, this other one is basically useless. But it has come time to run our test. And test. Yes, we've done it! We have collected data on this booster from space high above Kerman. And we've gotten paid for it. Excellent. This will pay off for both the launch vehicle, and it'll add some science. And add some much needed reputation. And now that we have done that, and consumed this science, and it is safely stored inside of this bay, we can prepare for re-entry. That was not expected. The decoupler appears to have exploded for some reason, which is very educational. Jeb, please give us a report on this explosion. Jeb can see, drifting off into the distance, a decoupler with 2 batteries attached to it inside. It appears that some intelligent person has mounted batteries inside of the decoupler at the bottom of the cockpit. So when the decoupler detaches, these batteries were dragged through the cockpit. Hopefully this will not interfere with any spacecraft systems. And as that part drifts silently off into the void, Jeb goes to look for the solid rocket booster to see if it can be found. But instead he finds the sun. Ah, there it is. It tumbles slowly, having been tested thoroughly, despite not having any fuel in it. Which is kind of confusing because if you think about it, all a solid rocket motor really is an empty aluminum casing. I mean, sometimes it's not aluminum, but all that there is a casing, and inside of it is solid fuel. So if you take the fuel out of a solid fueled booster, what are you testing? The ignition system? The ignition system should work no matter where you are. Thus begging the question, who is it that demanded us to fly this thing into space? What are their intentions? What is it that they want us to do? And now that I have run out of ways to create content, we accelerate time forwards until we hit the atmosphere. Pressing the wrong button, and now I must point the capsule upwards. And yes, we descend quickly into the lower atmosphere. The parachutes are armed in preparation for our landing, and then, oh no! The main parachutes have all been broken. The side parachutes are broken. Jeb thinks quickly. And before he passes out from his G-limit, he uses the emergency systems to detach the science. Wait, to detach the science? Hang on a moment. It wasn't supposed to do that. No. It appears some bureaucrat has decided that the science needed redundancy and not the capsule. Jebediah realizes that his only chance is to escape through EVA, but he cannot get out because somebody has bolted a parachute canister to the outside of the hatch. What absolute pillock designed this thing? Why didn't we use a capsule that could mount parachutes on top? How the fuck did Jeb get in if you can't open the door? All of these questions will echo through the minds of the personnel of the Kerbal Space Center for many years to come. Jeb uses his final moments not to curse and rue the day that a bureaucrat designed a spacecraft that he allowed himself to board. No. Instead, he tells Valentina that he trusts her to lead the space program as its chief pilot. That she's ready to take over for him. That she's ready to surpass him. Jeb uses his final recorded words with his final lungful of air before he crashes into the ocean to ask for one last thing. He pleads the Kerbals of the space program not to allow what's going to happen to him to stop them, for them to carry his dream of exploring. His transmission cuts off into static when he hits the water. And we all know Jeb is truly gone. Barely more than an hour after Jeb's death, a darkness has fallen over the Kerbal Space Center. A darkness far, far more perfect than any that could be caused merely by the fact that this is, tragically, only the first night of the Kerbal Space Program. The crew and the staff of the Space Center have already gathered around the flagpole, but for this ceremony there is one more attendee who must appear. Taking a deep breath, Jeb's mother Vermi climbs out of the funeral rover and slowly descends the stairs. As is the tradition that was established but was hoped would never have to take place, a funeral for a Kerbonaut has all attendees dressed as Kerbonauts, as after all, for this occasion of all others, all are Kerbonauts today. Unlike the rest, though, Vermi chooses to keep her spacesuit helmet on. She says that this is to honor Jeb, as he, after all, did not remove his before his final moments. In reality, she simply doesn't want anybody else to be able to read what her face belies. Slowly, she walks behind all of the others, already gathered to honor her son. And she smoothly slides behind Valentina, ready to do her part in the ceremony. Activating her helmet lights. Now, everything is complete. With a sigh, Valentina, the new chief pilot, forces herself to step forward. She walks over to the flagpole, and for a moment, she simply stands in front of it, looking up at the flag that Jebediah had worked so hard to put on this pole. Then she calmly takes her place, and she does the duty that she had never hoped that she would have to do. She takes out a flag and puts it into the ground and reveals it. This flag is a memorial to Jebediah Kerman. She places the plaque at the base of the flag and secures it. The plaque, which has been prepared today, is simply titled Jebediah Kerman, and it reads, "Killed by the whims of fate, bureaucracy, and the saints. Day 1, Year 1 of the Kerbal Space Program. The first chief pilot and crucial to establishing the program, Jeb will be remembered and mourned forever." Then Valentina turns to address the crew of the space program. This is a speech that she had never expected to give, but prepared she has to be at this very moment. She starts off her speech calmly and measured. Jeb died today doing what he dreamed of doing, going to space. It's a pity that he couldn't stay for any longer. She has more prepared, but she cannot bring herself to say it. After all, this is Jeb we're talking about. You can't just say anything for him, and no words seem to really sum up who he was or what he meant to the program. So she puts down her notes and addresses the crew of the space program directly. She tells them Jebediah wasn't just her boss. He was her hero. He was her inspiration. He was the one she looked up to all these years, before female Kerbals were given form by the developers in 1.0. She says each and every Kerbal gathered there, and each one around Kerman, and each one that travels beyond their world to see Jeb's dream come to life, will feel the scar left by his passing. She vows that despite his irreplaceable loss, the space program will continue, will survive. And as she steps into his role as chief pilot, she will push the program to go further and to make him proud. And so the program will make it without him. Finished, Valentina steps forward and faces the flag. And quietly, below her breath, she tells Jeb, "And I will make it without you, too." The morning after the funeral, Val and Bill, the program's chief engineer, stare to inspect Jebediah's last creation, a rather poorly conceived jet-powered car with a space capsule, with 2 seats. The vehicle does not actually have brakes and instead mounted 2 jet engines at the front, a testament to Jeb's ingenuity. And of course, this means that it just rolls away as soon as you get out, because of course you cannot actually make something stop with jet engines. The 2 of them watch it in silence. Neither of them wants to say it, but both of them know this is a really poor design. And of course, the elephant in the room. Bill speaks solemnly. "I can't believe that Wernher would put Jebediah in a capsule that doesn't have a parachute on top." Val turns to him in shock. "What do you mean, Wernher? Wernher told me you designed it." "Me? I would never design such a thing." "What? How could this be? Wernher wouldn't lie, would he?" "The only person who would possibly ever think to switch a space capsule for an aircraft cockpit simply for price reasons would be a bureaucrat." Both of them turn to face the nearby Kerbal. Standing on the runway observing it with them, but completely clueless to the conversation, is a local bureaucrat, Jebediah Kerman. Surprisingly quickly thereafter, an interesting spacecraft appears on the launch pad of the Kerbal Space Center. This spacecraft carries Jebediah Kerman on board. It launches into the sky with a singular purpose. See, it did not take long after Val and Bill realized that Jebediah was the one responsible for Jeb's death. And, of course, the astronauts of the Kerbal Space Center immediately prompted to mutiny, stealing equipment from the Research and Development Department, and, of course, borrowing some from the Jebediah Kerman junkyard, which was struggling to find someone to take over without an owner. They assembled this rocket in extremely quick order. Its mission? To carry Jebediah, the bureaucratic, bean-counting, finance, son of a bitch, etc., so on, with various curse words Valentina had learned from her mother, directly into the worst place imaginable for a Kerbal. The place that is furthest away from the place all Kerbals yearn to be forever in their hearts, space, which is, in other words, the seafloor. Jebediah, of course, protested this with all sorts of struggling and kicking and screaming and insisting, "You don't understand what you're doing, and I'm not the one," and so on and so forth, which Valentina hardly even paid attention to. But his protests were, of course, quickly overruled by the mutineers, who were much more numerous than him. Now descending, the rocket uses its engines to slow down, in order to not open the parachute too violently and accidentally kill Jebediah or damage some of the sensitive equipment inside. The flight computer engages to point straight up, so that the rocket can most ideally control its downward velocity. And once the rocket engines run out of fuel, the spacecraft separates, revealing inside the Jebediah Kerman Correctional Facility. which after a small delay deploys its parachutes. The design isn't simple. It is sealed. It is self-contained. It will last forever at the bottom of the ocean. It is nuclear powered, with an experimental greenhouse to ensure Jeremiah never runs out of supplies. And of course, to prevent any escapes, there is a parachute bolted directly over the escape hatch. And the facility gently parachutes into a landing. While the parachute opening was kind of violent, this part really won't be, because we don't want to damage that nuclear reactor. And once it reaches the water, the facility is going to begin ballasting itself so it can begin its long, long journey down to the seafloor. And so, Jeremiah's final journey begins. It's not a very fast journey, of course. Water is very dense, and it takes a surprising amount of work to sink anything on this planet, really. Kerman is, of course, several times denser in every possible way than Earth. Somehow, the surface gravity on this planet is exactly the same, or close enough, to what we experience here on planet Earth. But the planet itself is dramatically smaller. I think the radius is about 1/10. Of course, that means that, in reality, no realistic element that we know of here could comprise Kerman, meaning that some exotic material must have been used. And of course, such exotic material must translate over into the water, which is so dense that this very large, very heavy, supply-laden thing requires quite a lot of assistance to actually get down to the bottom. And of course it does so rather slowly. But now that caustics have disappeared from the water's surface, and the water above us seems to be reddening rather quickly, we can see Jeremiah's dive progressing slowly but surely. Inside the cockpit, we can see how it looks from his point of view. Of course, he can't see literally anything, seeing as how, for some reason, this thing has no windows. It should be noted that this thing, capsule, was indeed purchased by bureaucrats, as no astronaut would really want to sit in this thing. And of course, the two-person variant that Jeb's stuck on his car has the exact same layout, leaving you to really question how you cram two people into these things. Jeremiah would also wonder this if, by some providence of fate, he had any ability to get out or have another Kerbal in here. Of course, occasional reddening. The reddening, of course, comes from these strip lights, which at the bottom of the ocean are going to provide a lot of the lighting available to us. We can already see that everything is going rather dark. So let's speed this descent up a little bit. The nuclear reactor is, of course, operating at its minimum power setting. It is programmed so that it can increase power as necessary in order to keep up with the demands of the craft, but all it really needs to power are the lights in the greenhouse, and of course the systems required to pump coolant around and maintain it. However, running the reactor on such a low power level means that it can essentially do so in perpetuity, which is a great boon for the Jeremiah Kerman Correctional Facility. The lights, of course, are LEDs. They do consume some power, but the amount of power that they require is frankly minuscule. Slowly but surely, everything in the sea goes dark. The only light sources available are those that have been mounted on this craft. For some reason, the designer of this craft did not actually put lights down here at the bottom, where it would make sense to have lights so one could see the seafloor. This, of course, doesn't really matter to Jeremiah, seeing as he can't get out. but it does matter to us as we watch it slowly plunge into the abyss. And seeing as how fast forwarding has gotten tedious, let's just skip forward to the good part. Now with only 20 meters to go before the craft hits the seafloor, the seafloor slowly comes into view, and the landing gear extend. Now, it won't actually be 15 more meters before we touch down, since these landing gear hang quite far down. And we can see it slowly coming up as the mission timer hits 18 minutes and 45 seconds. We hit bottom. And there it is. We are now landed in the water. The craft is 9 meters tall, and it is time for the correctional facility to start righting itself. By extending its legs out to maximum, it can then lift the landing gear and come to rest on these new legs. Once these legs reach their full travel, it can auto-level, which jerks a little bit, but brings the entire craft up to 90 degrees. This is, of course, the first time that anyone has seen this seafloor, and we have broken quite a few records for doing so. 10 meters under the ocean, 20, 80, 240, 750 meters. For some reason, nobody wants to reward us for actually touching bottom. And of course, since Bob was involved, and Bob is a scientist, the Jebediah Kerman Correctional Facility does bring with it quite a useful host of scientific equipment. A material study reports that exposing the power source of the lab to water has been enlightening, probably literally. Of course we want to transmit this since we won't get any scientists. Observing the way that the plants grow under the water, we see that the plants are as mellow and serene as can be, but we can't harvest them yet. That will be up to Jebediah, as he has to harvest these plants in order to survive his confinement. The plants are also precariously perched underneath a glass dome 957 meters underneath the surface of the sea. On Earth this wouldn't work, but presumably the hyper-dense materials of Kerman engineering can manage to survive this situation. Jebediah reports, "I don't need to worry about pirates, right? Surely they're only after regular ships, not spaceships." No one told him this is, in fact, not a spaceship, technically speaking. But he seems to be coping with having been confined at the seafloor for several minutes now rather well. The thermometer reports the engineers haven't actually planned on putting a thermometer underwater, so all of the numbers have washed off, and it's unreadable. Thanks, Bob. Somehow we get science for that anyway. The atmospheric pressure somehow hasn't been shorted out by all of the water, and we're able to get a good reading to send back to Kerbal Space Center. We, of course, do not actually know what that reading is. And, finally, from our canister of mystery goo, the goo escapes into the water and runs away from this horrible place so far from space. Auto-leveling will have to take place repeatedly. The correctional facility seems to be sliding slowly across the seafloor towards, well, some sort of ravine. It is hard to see since everything here is being lit only by these power strips at the top and by these small spotlights. Everything has this red-purple tinge to it, even though I'm sure that in reality these rocks are, well, rock-colored. But now with all the other jobs done, the correctional facility can release these buoyancy moderation devices and the landing legs which we came up on. And we can watch them slowly drift up and away. I don't actually know if these will reach all the way up to the surface. It'll take some time for them to do so either way. And they spin a lot. And they seem to be spinning faster. Well, I was going to cut this, but now I'm kind of curious what's going to happen. As these are going to be the only pieces of the Jebediah Kerman Correctional Facility which actually survive the trip to the seafloor, or at least which make it up in any reasonable amount of time. Since the rest of it is going to survive there for quite a while, as is Jeremiah, we have no real need to revisit this again, and we can simply watch these moderation devices drift up and up and up. So far that they even get to see the light of the sun more than the light of the light strips. And so we're just going to watch these slowly drift up to the surface. While they do, of course, despite knowing fully well who was responsible, none of the mutineers that are responsible for the creation and launching of the Jebediah Kerman Correctional Facility have been or will ever be punished. Kerman, after all, strangely enough, has no functioning law enforcement, correction system, or really anything not related to spaceflight worth mentioning, with the exception, of course, of confining Jeremiah on the seafloor. So, Val and Bob and Bill and all of the trainees and all the staff will be able to continue their mission to go into space without Jeremiah. Therefore, in the Research and Development Department, the Kerbals begin to re-examine their ways. Even though Jeb's death was solely the fault of the hapless Jeremiah, it is argued that perhaps they could use this opportunity to examine how they could actually keep their Kerbals alive for longer. And as the flotation devices strangely come to a halt, not that far short of the sea surface, they have begun to research new equipment to reach a higher standard of safety on crewed flights. During launch, during landing, how to survive re-entry, how not to explode, and all sorts of other factors. With Jeremiah in exile, and the ladies and gentlemen over in R&D working hard on new ways to keep the pilots and scientists and engineers of the space program safe, life begins to return to normal. Nobody's really happy about the situation, but slowly and surely, people are getting used to the new normal without Jebediah. Of course, over in the vehicle assembly building, there is one lone source of joy. Wernher von Kerman, the chief spacecraft designer for the space program, contently smiles to himself as he sits. Behind him are a number of interesting equations that don't seem to have much to do with his work. Ja, he announces. This will work. This will work. He quietly stashes his creation, a project beyond any real ambitions formerly considered by the space program. A permanent outpost in space, where Kerbals can live indefinitely without any dependence on Kerman. We actually got paid quite a lot of money and science for doing the whole Jeremiah bottom of the sea thing. But we'll just deploy these parachutes and get along with our lives. For doing this, we have gotten some money from those tests, and quite a bit of money actually for testing these prop fans. Lovely. And of course, Val is our pilot, and we roll her out to the runway for Kerman's very first aircraft flight.